Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Monza circuit for the second race of this weekend's triple header in the Radical European Masters. It's Ben Evans and Will Brown from Radical Sports Cars talking to you this morning as we build up for a 60-minute race, but we have a little bit of delay before we get underway because heavy rainfall overnight has left us with a slippery and greasy track. We've had two incidents on the installation lap for the cars coming to the grid.
Yeah, that's right. It looks like John Corbett and one of the two 360 Racing SR8s. We've just got to determine which one. I think it's the number 88 car, the championship leaders Terrence Woodward and Ross Kaiser, that have unfortunately slid out of a contention on the opening warm-up lap just as they've been going around onto the grid. Conditions are really challenging this morning, and we saw in the previous GT Cup qualifying that the guys were switching from slicks to wets and back again. So it's been a bit of a lottery on tyre choice this morning, and unfortunately it looks like the conditions have caught these two guys out.
So there is Terrence Woodward, who was a non-point scorer yesterday, and having come into the weekend with a very comfortable championship lead, is now not going to be scoring any points in this second race either. And he's got off in a very unusual place. It's the left-hand kink between the second Lesmo and Ascari, and as you can see, he did a fair amount of damage to the front of the 88 car. John Corbett, meanwhile, went off on the exit of Ascari, an incident not that dissimilar to David Coulthard on the formation lap of the 1995 Italian Grand Prix. And as a result, it means that we've got a little bit of a delay before we get underway. We have got a couple of gaps on the grid now. Will, one of the big talking points for today is surely going to be fuel economy for the SR8s, because Alex Capadia, who lines up at the front of the grid, finished second yesterday, was chasing for the win and ran dry metres from home.
Yeah, that's right. Really just trickled over the line, managed to get the clutch in and trickle over. But looking good now, of course, on the front row. Looks like he'll have clear air alongside him. Then we look back to the second row. That's Stuart Mosley again. He was another one of the non-finishers yesterday. Unfortunately, they had some issues with the car there in the opening stages.
Victor Crea and Paddy Mcluhan in the Bright Orange 52 car went with a bold setup choice yesterday on a very slippery circuit. They went with low levels of rear grip on the rear wing, and it made for a pretty wild ride. They did very well, though, to, well, I was going to say bring the car home in third. They almost did, but Paddy Mcluhan, another of the drivers who appeared to run out of fuel on the final lap, and that gave this man, Alain Costa, a podium finish.
Yeah, that's right. He did a fantastic job to really keep a measured pace right through the race, and yeah, great result from the Monegasque driver. But yeah, as we've seen several times this year, and there's our race winners from yesterday. That's Tony Wells and James Littlejohn returning to the series this year for the first time here at Monza, and they did a fantastic job yesterday. Really a sterling drive by Tony in the second half of the race to maintain a good pace right to the end of the race, but at the same time conserving the fuel.
Marcello Maritotto again, waving and thumbs up on the grid from Marcello. He and Marco Cencetti were in great form yesterday. Jean Gandar was having a very solid race. He stayed out of trouble and brought the car home in one piece, which, given how treacherous the track conditions were, was quite an achievement.
Yeah, as you say, there was a real gamble yesterday, both in terms of setup and in fuel strategy. Shaheen Nouri, again, one of the SR3 RSX competitors in this season's championship.
And Shaheen was there or thereabouts fighting for a podium. Roger Bromley, an outright race winner in the SR3 at Spa last year when it was an SR3 only race. Very experienced Radical campaigner. Ricardo Donor also looked fantastic yesterday. Really nice driving from Ricardo, and again another of those we can look to see challenging for a podium in the Supersport class.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see today if these conditions are still pretty tricky out there, as we've seen on this formation lap. Then the SR3s could really be in the mix, including these guys, Bradley Ellis and Andy Cummings.
Well, there is the flatbed ride of shame for John Corbett's car. Hopefully that damage is cosmetic and he will be out for this afternoon's race, as Mark Crader gets the handshake and fires up, and a big smile in the helmet at the back of the grid, which is what it's all about. Now,
yeah, great to have him the grid here in Europe at last as well, because he's a former SR1 Cup protagonist, worked his way up through the Radical national scene, and now in Europe. So yeah, great illustration of that.
So here's the grid then, with Alex Capadia at the front, Terrence Woodward not alongside on the front row, then Victor Crea and Stuart Mosley, ahead of Tony Wells and Alain Costa. Jean Gandar all alone on row 4. John Corbett, as we saw his car on the flatbed. Roger Bromley and Marcello Maratiotto right at the sharp end of the Supersport class, clear of Andy Cummings and Shaheen Nouri. And then didn't catch a glimpse of Yanni Herpia or Andrev Navrati, so they don't appear to be there. James Abbott may well start from the pit lane in the developmental Spider, so that leaves Mark Crader on his own on row 8. Now, we were speculating off air as to the reason for those incidents on the installation lap, and our guess is that the rain is forecast this morning, but not until the checkered flag in this race, and therefore it would appear that most of the drivers have gambled with slick tyres, but it is still a pretty slippery surface.
Yeah, there's virtually no wind at all today, and it is still quite overcast, so there's no sunshine. The track temperature is going to be struggling to rise, and I think we may well see some tyre changes during the pit stop. There's no real clear dry line, sort of certainly outside the commentary box here, but yeah, it's going to be a question of tyres, and I think ultimately fuel as well. And Alex Capadia, they're out on the front row. If they can do the distance on fuel, or even if they choose to put a splash and dash in, he's going to be looking very strong today.
Well, what we were seeing yesterday when we started on a wet track with wet tyres was that the SR8's just about could get to the end with some short shifting, with some fuel management. The track is appreciably dry for the start of today's race, and therefore that margin call gets even tighter. Yeah,
and we saw plenty of action yesterday, as you say. Even in the changeable conditions, the cars were moving around a lot, and even the most seasoned SR8 guys certainly looked uncomfortable in those conditions. It is incredibly treacherous out there.
Well, away we go now on the green flag formation lap with a slightly depleted grid, but still a very healthy field of cars heading towards the Rettifilio. Opportunity just to get a little bit of heat into the tyres here, and this is also where the balanced handling of the Spider might start to come to the fore. The fact that they don't have a worry about fuel stops either because of the size of the tank, and just that slightly more steady handling that we've seen a couple of times this year, a little bit less nervous.
Yeah, undoubtedly, and of course you've got a bigger tyre footprint as well. The Spiders run an 18-inch rear and a 17-inch front versus the 16 and 15 of the SR8, so the tyre conservation is going to be superior in these conditions for sure.
And so that is going to make things very, very interesting. Stuart Mosley and Jack Bartels didn't really see their true pace yesterday. Stuart, unfortunately, dropping out of the race reasonably early on, and so that will be an interesting dynamic. I expect that the Nielsen Racing team have probably taped the words fuel conservation to Victor Correa's steering wheel just to remind him to make sure he keeps an eye on that. Whereas Alex Capadia, who finished the Le Mans 24 Hours this year, has done a lot of endurance racing. He understands and has experience of that trade-off between pace but also preserving the car.
Yeah, and hopefully he'll have translated some of that experience into his co-driver as well this weekend. Jeremy Ferguson, a really, really experienced SR8 racer here this weekend. And then, of course, we as you say, we got Victor, who yesterday pushed maybe a little bit harder than we expected in the opening stages of the race before handing over to Radical Sprint Championship protagonist Paddy Mcluhan, who again another driver making his debut this weekend.
There is Alain Costa, who finished an excellent third yesterday, despite a number of early spins. But the Monegasque has been in fine form throughout the year. He really seems to have got to grip with his car and has been mixing at the sharp end throughout much of the season. Now, the Supersport class race could be absolutely fascinating today in terms of the way that some of the success seconds begin to play out in the pits, not to mention the fact that in the Supersport Championship, Andy Cummings, Bradley Ellis are just 3 points clear Marcello Maratiotto and Marco Cencetti.
Yeah, and in terms of pace, there's really nothing to separate them. There was a very small coming together between those two cars yesterday that ultimately cost Cummings, but in terms of pace, Cencetti and Ellis are very closely matched, and likewise Cummings and Maratiotto. So I can see this championship battle going all the way down to the final round.
So this could be really entertaining. 60 minutes of racing. They are just heading through Ascari now on this green flag formation lap. Then they'll begin to form up side by side before they get towards the Parabolica, and then it will be all eyes to the gantry. The marshal's doing a great job, as ever, here at Monza, of just making sure that the track is clear of all the grass that got thrown onto it with the installation lap dramas. And now Capadia just pacing the field. He is in the black and blue machine. On the second row, we've got the orange and white car of Victor Creer, the all-white car with the yellow helmet. That is Stuart Mosley. Then the blue and white car just behind is Tony Wells. It's probably that quartet who we would be looking for to challenge for the victory this morning. But as we found out yesterday, 60 minutes is a very long way to go in motor racing, as the field beginning to form up, although some of the Supersport cars just need to maybe... Oh, that is Capadia spins in the Parabolica as he grids the cars up, ready for the rolling start. And so more drama before the race is even underway. Capadia should get up and running, but it's now going to be Victor Creer and Stuart Mosley at the front of the field as we wait for the red lights to change to go racing for the first time today here in the Radical European Masters in Monza, as the lights are about to flash out now, and away we go as the field hurtles towards the Rettifilo. There is Capadia at the rear of the field, scything his way through, but it's almost four wide amongst the Supersport cars, so he's a little bit boxed in. Now this is going to be a voyage of discovery on the brakes into the Rettifilo for the first time at pace. Yeah,
good start there by Tony Wells, and Alan Costa as well off the third row there. Made a fantastic start to make his way around Mosley and hold third position.
And they have all made it safely through the Rettifilo. There is Capadia. He's already gained 3 places as the field then streaked through Curva Grande. There's the beginnings of a dry line here. You can see just a little bit of that lighter asphalt. And then on the brakes into the second chicane, where again there is that little pocket of traction. Stuart Mosley moves inside Alain Costa. And it's Capadia already up past Marcello Maracciotto. That's another 3 places gained then since the Rettifilo, and immediately past Ricardo Dona as well for Alex Capadia, but already he's given away about 4 or 5 seconds to Victor Creer.
Yeah, that's the last thing he needs to be doing in these circumstances. As you say, with a drying track, Victor will be doing a lot better than he certainly was in the damp yesterday. As we just see, that's James Abbott catching up to the back of the field, having started from the pit lane.
So here is Victor Creer into Ascari, and it's been the exit of Ascari, then into the Parabolica, which has caught 1 or 2 of them out already in the pre-race entertainment, so to speak. And so they're going to have to be a little bit mindful. Meanwhile, Maracciotto's found the way past Ricardo Dona. Andy Cummings, rather, to the inside of Shaheen Nouri.
Yeah, and a very late dive there by Roger Bromley. He didn't quite make it stick, though, as you can see. Shaheen Nouri coming back at him there on the exit. And a spin for Nouri.
Around he goes, and this is the explanation as to Maracciotto getting past Ricardo Dona. It helps a little bit by Dona running out wide. Right, here's another look at the spin for Shaheen Nouri, and yeah, he's just offline, isn't he? And then gets onto the curb, and that kicks the traction away from him. And fortunately, keeping it away from anything more solid than the gravel trap.
Back on the power and able to just drive through, but yeah, that's cost him a few places, and now down to 9th place, it looks like.
Meanwhile, Stuart Mosley lines up and moves to the inside of Alain Costa, if not a little bit more. Mosley reclaims that 3rd position. They're all queuing up behind Tony Wells. There is Capadia, who's already eased past Jean Gandar, and Gandar, possibly with a little bit of bodywork rubbing on his tyre. As now Costa, clearly liking what his car's doing, looks to fight back at Stuart Mosley once more as they turn through Curva Grande. Here is the race leader Victor Creer, who's not exactly sprinting away from Tony Wells. And Tony seems to be very comfortable with what the car's doing in these damp conditions.
Yeah, just as we saw yesterday, that car really was certainly looked the most stable of all of the front-running SR8s. You could see that they were putting less effort into both turning the car in, under braking. It just looked really planted, and yeah, they could put it pretty much where they want. Just see another spin there for Shaheen. That looks like the exit of the Parabolica.
Yeah, 2 spins in 2 corners. It's so often the case. You just lose all your rhythm, you lose your confidence, you lose the heat in the tyres. And then you can end up being caught out. But there's a lot of racing remaining, so I'm sure that Shaheen will be back up to speed fairly shortly. Meanwhile, we have a challenge from Capadia to the inside of Alain Costa into Ascari. and he makes it stick. Nicely done. Just needs to make sure he gives the curbs a wide berth on the exit. I'm sure he will. As that happens, meanwhile, Stuart Mosley looking to challenge Tony Wells as the pair of them run towards the Parabolica. Now, we know how slippery the Parabolica is. We've already seen a couple of spins. So Mosley doesn't necessarily want to duck offline unless the move is sealed. And in the end, he's able to ease past on the way in. Ooh, gets right out to the periphery of the circuit, but then the dry line kicks in. And if you've got the momentum and you've got the bravery, you can then really start to accelerate.
Yeah, that's right, and really late on the brakes there, and a good illustration of the various, the difference in handling between the Spider and the SR8. You've got a much more centralised weight distribution in the Spider that you can exploit into these braking zones.
So flicking on through the Rettifilio, just kicking the tail of the car out is Stuart Mosley. Into the pits is Jean Gandar, probably just to get the car checked over after we saw those puffs of smoke a little bit earlier on. And now the race leader Victor Crea, 4 seconds, his advantage over Tony Wells. Over Stuart Mosley rather, Tony Wells just behind Mosley, and then we've got Alex Capadia, who's already fought his way up through into 4th, and Capadia looking to the inside into the first Lesmo. Does he find the grip? Yes, he does. Nicely done by Alex Capadia. So the field then flick their way through the second of the Lesmos, and the question here really for me, Will, is whether or not Capadia, possibly working in train with Stuart Mosley, can start to come back towards Victor Correa. Meanwhile, another spin for Shahi Nouri, this time on the way into the Parabolica.
Looks like he might just be nursing some rear diffuser damage there, and no doubt the team will be getting him in to investigate that. Oh, and we see that's
Roger Bromley.
Like Roger Bromley taking the escape road there on the way into the Rettifilio as well.
So the warning flag for track limits has gone out to Shahi Nouri, I think a little bit unnecessarily. He'll be well aware that he's been off the edge of the circuit as Stuart Mosley just has that minute correction in the Spider midway through the Parabolica, but you can see how the corner comes to the drivers if they're able to hold their nerve and keep traction. So across the line, and yes, Correa's lead has almost been halved. It's down to 2.4 seconds. Victor Correa 2 minutes 3.2 last time around. Stuart Mosley a 2 minutes 1.6, and Alex Capadia not much slower. So now the Spider really coming to the fore. Alex Capadia riding shotgun. Here is James Abbott in the development Spider.
Taking a rather wide line on the exit of Parabolica there, but back on the track again. But yeah, you can see, and this is going to be great news for Capadia as well, because if he can hang on to the coattails of Mosley, this could be great. Yeah, I said this could be really good for him, particularly as they're only carrying an 85-second pit stop here this weekend.
Another look at that moment for James Abbott.
He's possibly just missed his braking zone there.
And the one benefit, such as it is of it having been raining for much of the past couple of days, is the gravel is nice and compact now, so you can drive through it. Meanwhile, on towards Ascari. Now this is interesting because Stuart Mosley, for my money, has rather shaken off Alex Capadia here, and Mosley is continuing to chip away at Victor Correa's advantage. Stuart, another driver with long-distance enduro racing experience. Just seeing if he can begin to hassle and harry the former British Formula 4 Championship racer, former Euro Formula Open Championship racer, Victor Correa. The leading trio then easing clear of Tony Wells, but I think the big difference is that Wells of the starting drivers is probably the one who's got the professional drive to hand over to at mid-race distance, and therefore as long as he can keep this leading trio in touch, then that gives James Littlejohn a fighting chance.
Yeah, they are of course carrying a 25 an extra 15 second success seconds from 20 seconds of success seconds from yesterday's race victory. So Yeah, that's going to count against him in the pit stops. But Littlejohn was supremely quick in that opening stint yesterday, and yeah, he's got as good a chance as any, particularly if they can go the full distance without need to refuel once more.
But that said, Victor Correa and Alex Capadia have only got 5 seconds less in the pits than Wells and Littlejohn, whereas Stuart Mosley and Jack Bartels, well, they've got the whip hand. They've only got 70 seconds of pit stop time, so that is going to give Yap potentially a reasonably nice advantage to hold on to.
Looks like Capadia's just had an opportunity to close up a few tenths once more to Mosley in that last half a lap there.
And this is always the difficulty, isn't it, with the gaps ebbing and flowing in these early stages, because each and every corner is a little bit of a challenge. We've got the black and orange flag actually for the 44 car of Shaheen Nuri. You can just see in front of us. I suspect that Race Direction saw that diffuser damage as we did and has just decided to bring in Shaheen, get the car checked over before sending him back on his way. And the Swiss driver doing exactly the right thing, moving aside.
Brief lock up there by Victor. He's clearly pushing hard again, very, very aware of the two chasing cars behind him.
What we don't know, of course, and we will find out when the pit window opens about 10 minutes' time, is whether or not the SR8s are going to put in a little bit of a top-up of fuel for comfort, because already the early stages of this race are a fair bit quicker than the early stages of the race that we had yesterday. There was a little bit of a squeal of tires into the Parabolica, but it doesn't appear to have slowed Victor Correa. He was 1.8 seconds clear of Stuart Mosley at the end of lap 4. He completes lap 5 now. He's only a second clear of Mosley, and Mosley about to be challenged here by Capadia, who gets a run in the slipstream and draws alongside and past the car of Stuart Mosley. Mosley thinks better of fighting back into the Rettifilio, as Victor Correa was just a little bit squirmy on the way into the chicane, but he emerges in one piece from the edge of it. But what you can see with Stuart Mosley is that he's able to get the power down that little bit earlier in the Spider, but was thwarted coming out of the Rettifilio there by Alex Capadia, who just had the car perfectly positioned. And now Capadia looks to like the move on Victor Correa, and it could be 2 passes in 2 corners here for Capadia. Correa, though, moves across to defend. Capadia thinks that there's no way through, and instead moves across the inside as well, just to make sure that Stuart Mosley can't find a way past either.
Yeah, I mean, we saw just how marginal the field for both of these two leading cars was yesterday. It was only on that final lap that they finally spluttered to a halt. So it's whether or not that ultimately that lack of fuel was down to the difficulty that they had driving in those conditions. There was maybe a lot more sort of throttle and wheel spin than Correa would have liked yesterday, or whether it was down purely to the. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting balance today, and I'm sure there's been some scratching of heads overnight to determine fuel usage.
Yeah, particularly as in a drying race, you don't really get a truly clear picture of fuel consumption. Here we see it again, and it was the classic Monza manoeuvre, really. Yeah,
great slingshot out the Parabolica there. You already had a good drive, and then just used the big hole in the air that Spider was cutting to get an advantage and make the pass stick.
All aspects of being a racing driver are fun, but there's nothing quite as enjoyable actually as when you take the advantage of a slipstream tow from somebody. It really is exhilarating as you feel yourself being sucked up to the car in front and then moving across to make the pass. As Correa consults his mirrors, he's just 0.7 of a second clear of Capadia as they flash through. We're into lap 7 of this 60-minute race. And Victor Correa defending offline into the Rettifilio, and that costs him a lot of time. The car flipping sideways and then moving a little bit more than he would like to as he accelerates away. And given that there is only really half a dry line here, Correa doesn't need to defend. If he just sticks to the racing line, it's going to be very hard for Capadia to find a way through.
Yeah, that's right. And you just looking there through certainly that first couple of corners, there is a drive. Oh, another lock up there for Correa. Seems to have got it stopped on time and stay off the curbs. But no, that's the last thing he needs to be doing. He really compromised himself on the exit of the opening chicane.
So around the first Lesmo, and again Correa slightly offline, and Capadia senses glory. But what he's going to have to do is just wait for the perfect moment to challenge Correa, who again consults his mirrors. Continues to look to see where Alex Capadia is, but Capadia, what he will most likely do is either look to take advantage of the slipstream towards the Parabolica or into turn 1, or take advantage of a mistake from Creer, who again snatches the break into Ascari, but actually gathers it up quite nicely. Now, is Capedi going to challenge the Parabolica or just wait for the slipstream along the start and finish straight? Here is what happened at the Rettifilio.
Yeah, he ran in a lot deeper than he was hoping to, and obviously that then compromised the second part. Had to turn in really tight, and you can see the back end of the car squirming and sliding there as well.
And now Capadia is definitively in the slipstream behind Victor Creer as the pair of them hurtle out of the Parabolica and a long start and finish straight, and it's Capadia who leads across the line by 14 thousandths of a second. Creer looks to follow back in and might get another bite at the cherry here towards the Rettifilio. I think knows it's a little bit too slippery to the inside to come barrelling up and risk something. So now that Capadia is into the lead, we're pretty much exactly 1/4 race distance. The order is Alex Capadia from Victor Creer and Stuart Mosley. That leading trio is 1. In 4th, we've got Tony Wells. 5th is Alain Costa. Or rather, in 5th now it's James Abbott. 6th is Alain Costa. 7th and leading the Supersport class is Marcello Maratiotto. 2nd Supersport runner is Ricardo Doner in 8th. And it's Andy Cummings in 9th, and he completes the Supersport podium.
Now, you would really have to think that given the fact that he's in just 1/4 of a race distance, he's gone from the back of the grid all the way through to the front again, that Capadia is probably going to have pushed those tyres a little bit harder than he would have liked, and certainly likewise on the fuel strategy. So I would be expecting that that car to be taking fuel on in the pit stop. Now, with the pit stop refueling regulations, because of safety, you then have to take an extra 30 seconds in the pit stop. So, he's going to have Ferguson's going to have all the work to be done all over again when they come into the second half of the race.
Yeah, I suspect that Alex will be kicking himself really for that spin on the formation lap, but these things happen in motorsport, and now the question's going to be, and really he's caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, because one option for Capadia now is to get into short shifting mode, as we'll have a replay first of Marcello Maratiotto, well held on the way into Ascari. He could get into short shifting and fuel saving mode now, but then he gives Jeremy Ferguson a time deficit to overhaul, or he just gets the hammer down, drives as hard as he can for the next 23 minutes. And
there's still a high degree of uncertainty, of course, about just how much he's used over the plan in this first quarter of the race. So, yeah, it's a difficult one to call. I wouldn't think that the team would risk it and would take fuel on. As you say, they simply just don't know how far he's had to push in order to retake that pole position.
Well, he just sets the fastest lap at 1 minute 56.5, but again, it's hard to determine how much of that's due to an elevation of pace and how much of that is due to the fact that the track is drying a little bit. Turning through Curva Grande, Stuart Mosley in the number 5 car, the Spider, is still the driver to watch for, I think, with a view to the overall race victory, because he and Jaap Bartels have got 15 seconds less in the pits than Victor Creer in second place, 20 seconds less in the pits. That's Capadia in the lead, so Stuart Mosley beautifully poised.
Yeah, certainly in terms of in terms of race strategy, they've got the odds stacked in their favour. Of course, with the Spider having the larger capacity fuel tank and the bigger tyre footprint, then the car's going to be more box fresh towards the end of the race than the SR8s are.
Meanwhile, Capadia and Creer, I think, struggling to restrain their enthusiasm, having a little bit of a dice, and as a result, the pair of them running in tandem, beginning to ease clear of Stuart Mosley. But I suspect that various abacuses were pulled out of the trailers overnight, with a view probably as to what the ideal lap time is to make it through to the flag without changing tyres. But at the moment, the sun's peeking through. The weather forecast suggests that it's going to start raining about 11:30 local time this morning, and that's just at the checker flag of this race. But for now, it's actually brightening up.
Yeah, you'd say it's probably, with the first few shadows being cast across the circuit, it's actually probably brighter now than it has been at any point up to through the race weekend. So this could create a bit of track temperature, and then as the track temperature rises, those wets are going to go just a little bit past the best. They've got a wide operating window with the Dunlop wet tyre, but it won't last forever.
Do we think they're on wets on or slicks? Over is the question.
Well, that's another question. Yeah, absolutely.
Meanwhile, This is Stuart Mosley through the Parabolica, and it's just the entry to the Parabolica that's the only point in the circuit he's looked uncomfortable. He's had to have a few corrections. Here, meanwhile, is another car that we can expect to see coming into play later on in the race. That's Tony Wells, yesterday's race winner. He will be passing over to James Littlejohn.
Yeah, and they really didn't put a foot wrong yesterday, did they? Wells and Littlejohn back in the Nielsen Racing squad with their SR8 for the first time this season, and really it was imperious from start to finish. James Littlejohn did a fantastic job in the opening stages of the race to pull out an advantage and maintain a good gap to the rest of the field, and then Tony did exactly what he needed, kept his cool when he came under pressure towards the end of the race and held on for the win. So very, very impressive on their return to Radical Racing.
We're only 40 seconds away from the opening of the pit window, but don't forget they need to go past the pit lane open board on the signalling gantry before they can pit in the next time round. Here is James Abbott starting from the back of the grid. Now this is an invitation class Spider, it's a developmental car trying a few different bits and pieces.
Yeah, and actually he's coming back into contention here. He's lapping some 3 seconds, or certainly 2.5 seconds a lap faster than Wells, the car in front of him. So the front guys have perhaps got to be a little bit careful here as Abbott starts to come back up through the field.
Well, certainly the whatever they're trying on the car seems to be working, doesn't it? Because
this development car's running the 3.5 litre Ford EcoBoost engine, which is sort of a very, very low stressed engine that's used in the Ford, the Radical RXC road car. So it's the first time that car's running this configuration.
I'd like to know what that feels like, but my sample copy of the RXC road car hasn't made its way to me yet, Will.
It's in the post.
Okay, thank you. As Abbott is reeling in Tony Wells. Now, that's a 1 minute 54.0 from James Abbott, playing a 1 minute 56.0 for Alex Capadia at the front of the field. So he's closing on the leaders to the tune of 2 seconds a lap here, James Abbott. And this is not done and dusted. I suspect at the end of this lap we can expect to see Tony Wells coming into the pits to hand over to James Littlejohn. As Abbott.
Yeah, and a good drive by James Abbott out of the chicane there. Looks like he's again been able to close a couple more tenths on the run through and on the way into
the second chicane. Is he going to challenge Wells on this occasion? No, he's not. He gets right up onto the tail behind Tony. As the pair of them flick through. Now, these are two cars that aren't in championship contention. And I think really in terms of the championship battle, probably that the focus for this race this morning is for both Victor Crair and Stuart Mosley to bring their cars home as hard the order as possible, particularly with Terrence Woodward in a non-scoring situation. And also Manhalal's not here this weekend.
Absolutely essential for, as you say, for Mosley and Bartels. They've slipped a championship place in the last race with their DNF and currently sit some 120 points behind Woodward and Kaiser, who of course are out this race, but still leading the championship going into the second race of the weekend. So we've got another 84 points to go in this weekend available, and then another 126 when we go to Barcelona. So it's still very much all to play for.
Certainly is. Don't forget you will be able to join us in the usual place for all of the action from the championship finale in Barcelona, the 31st of October and 1st of November. As around the Parabolica, James Abbott winds up the throttle and he powers past Tony Wells, because as we surmised, Wells ducks into the pits to hand over to James Littlejohn. So the first of our mandatory mid-race pit stops is underway. Tony Wells rolls down the pit lane. And that will feel agonisingly slow for Tony. If you're one of the mechanics, it feels... Now, fuel's going in. There we see it as Wells comes to a halt. And he's just missed his marks as well. He jumps out, Littlejohn jumps in, and then they are going to take no chances whatsoever and top up the fuel in the car.
Yeah, that's right. So wait for the team to step away from the car. Obviously, you can't refuel with the driver in the car, and that'll cost them an extra 30 seconds. But I would imagine that's more than capable of being redeemed by Littlejohn.
Although they were carrying an extra 20 seconds anyway, or not a little bit, even a little bit more than that, through the success seconds from yesterday. This is the fight at the front of the field. That's Capadia from Victor Crair and Stuart Mosley. Now, our expectation is that none of these three cars will pit in in the opening phase of the pit window. They'll leave it until a little bit later on. I think we'd also expect to see in the Supersport class Andy Cummings to come in fairly early to pass over to Bradley Ellis.
Yeah, and likewise Maritiotto to Cencetti as well.
Around the Parabolica for Stuart Mosley, and that each and every time we see the cars going through the Parabolica, there is just a little bit more of lightly coloured asphalt. It shows that the dry line is really beginning to rubber in now as they head into their 13th lap. Still, Alex Capadia, the race leader, from Victor Crea in second place, Stuart Mosley in third, and then James Abbott up into fourth from Alain Costa. Now, what's really interesting here is if both Capadia and Correa are going to be pitting in, as into the pits comes Andy Cummings, to hand over to Bradley Ellis. Also in the background, you can see that James Abbott is in. What's really interesting is that if Capadia and Correa are going to be refuelling well, and they're pushing as hard as they can, then this is looking very, very nice for Stuart Mosley.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, undoubtedly. You know, and there's an opportunity now as these other guys come into pits that he's going to have some clear air as well. It's going to take the pressure off him, you know, as Correa and yeah, depending on when they come into stop. But yeah, there's a good opportunity to get some clear air, and that obviously is going to help him as well to conserve the tyres on his car. Yeah, the race is going to come back to them in the last stages, for sure.
Here's the pit stop for James Abbott. Just a few checks being made to the car as well. Abbott sitting very relaxed in the cockpit. He will be, I think, delighted with how it has been going in these opening stages. Now they're getting in and amongst the traffic. There is Marcello Maritiotto. He has got Riccardo Dona just behind him. That's actually the battle for the Supersport class lead. Alex Capadia is going to try and pick his way through. Not sure Riccardo Dona saw that Capadia was looking to the inside of the Parabolica. And in fact, Riccardo is going to hug the inside of the road, appeal into the pits, as in, no he's not, but Marcello Maritiotto certainly is. He goes in to hand over to Marco Cencetti. Capadia continues on his way, reels off another lap. He's now a couple of seconds clear of Victor Crea, 3.7 seconds up on Stuart Mosley. As to the inside of Dona goes Crea into the Rettifilio, and that time round, Victor Crea gets the car stopped exactly as he would like to.
Yeah, the Raw team there just checking tyre pressures. Good release there from Maritiotto, and the handover to Cencetti, a really experienced driver here. Marco's sort of a Monza circuit pro, really, a huge amount of experience in the SR3 here particularly, and blindingly fast. So yeah, they're looking really good for that Supersport class win.
The leading trio still running in close contention. In the background, headlights blaze, was James Abbott, but he has had his pit stop, so essentially he is a lap down really on this group, but that will all correct itself through the pit window. But as we are approaching half race distance, the race a little bit in flux because of these pit stops being underway, as Capadia runs underneath the Mons banking into the Ascari section of the circuit. Hard to believe that up until the early 1970s this was just a flat-out left-hand kink. It's still pretty rapid now, and
yeah, it's still an incredibly formidable chicane, as you say, one of the fastest chicanes really certainly on the Grand Prix calendar. And now I know it's always around that the drivers really look forward to. Alex Capadia, who's sort of been diving in and out of cars all season, this was the one he really wanted to do. So when he got a late call up on Thursday afternoon to replace James Swift, who's unable to attend due to business commitments, he was absolutely delighted when I spoke to him when he arrived.
Capadia hurtles along the start and finish stretch. He's going to be overhauling Roger Bromley, who emerges from the pits following his mandatory pit stop. And Roger just files back into the racing line behind Capadia. Now, what sort of pace is James Abbott going to be running at? That's going to be the question. He is a lap down, as I say, because he hasn't yet had his mandatory pit stop, as Victor Crea looks the inside of Bromley into Curva Grande. Not sure Roger quite saw him until the last minute, possibly Crea just in his blind spot. As we have a look at Victor Crea again, that's the technique. You can see his eyes looking well ahead up the road, and that's what these drivers do. They're always thinking about the next corner. and almost the mechanics of driving each given turn is secondary to actually thinking about the exit of that turn and the setup for the next corner.
Yeah, and it's particularly with the SR8, you've got to be very, very secure in terms of your exit point and getting the power on just at the right point. We're just getting notification of a stop-go pitch infringement, not telling us which car that is yet. But
yes, we will find out in due course who has earned themselves the stop-and-go penalty. It's not one of this leading trio. I think the question's going to be whether or not it is James Littlejohn or James Abbott. If it's either of that pairing, then that really does put a slightly different complexion on the race. Now, I just wonder if it could be James Littlejohn rather, because of the fact that Tony Wells overshot his marks and had to push the car back. We will...
we're running out really wide there. Looks like maybe... I would have said Capadia there, maybe running a little bit wider out onto the slippery areas. Now we see Correa coming in for his service pit stop.
And so the same as yesterday, actually, with Victor Correa. He and Paddy Mcluhan doing exactly half of the race each. Now, the key question here is going to be, are they about to refuel the 52 car? That is the point of interest. Yes, they are. So clearly the maths overnight suggests that there isn't it isn't worth the risk, is it, of trying to go single-handedly. Now, the only thing to say is that we have seen the car that Alex Capadia is in the hands of James Swift this year, perform minor miracles in terms of fuel consumption. So I still wonder whether or not we're going to actually see a top-up of fuel into the race leader's car.
Yeah, that opening round at Jerez where Swifty managed to hold off the rest of the field for the whole race and take the win, and that was, as you say, it was a masterclass really, due in part undoubtedly to his driving. He did exactly what he needed to do and dictated the pace of the race, defended really well but never really overstretched the car, and that meant they could take the flag. But of course Jerez is a very, very different circuit from Monza. Which is the high speed and the hard acceleration here for long periods of time. You're on the throttle for a longer period of time here than anywhere else. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a gamble, but they may well choose to take it.
Well, Alan Costa also tops up with fuel. Yeah, I think what it is that at Jerez, because the longest straight is only some 600 metres, you can afford to drive well within the car on occasion. Here at Monza, you just can't be running at 70% throttle down one of these straights.
No, and again, it's all about the minimum amount of time of coasting as well. It's that with here you need to brake so late. It's so critical under braking, so you're just on that full throttle for such a long period of time. And now we see Capadia coming in to stop.
So as Capadia comes in, he will be passing over to Jeremy Ferguson. Also in is Stuart Mosley, turned over to Jaap Bartels. So all the principal runners in this race getting their pit stops done. Nice to know that it's a stop-and-go penalty for James Abbott, by the way, for the pit infringement. So that might take him out of contention. And yes, there is going to be fuel going into the 46 car as Capadia leaps out. So nobody taking any chances, are they? But of course, this is where it's advantage Mosley and Bartels. They don't have to refuel. And as Jaap Bartels gets strapped in, he's potentially going to emerge with a reasonably significant advantage.
Yeah, Bartels has just got the standard 45-second stop, so they're carrying no success seconds at all. Obviously, courtesy of that DNF that they had in the first race, unfortunately. So, yeah, game one here, and it's looking very, very good for that Nielsen Racing Spider.
So this is the car that's racing the static Spider in the pits, the 52 machine of Paddy Mcluhan, who has come to Radical Racing relatively early on in his career. I think he raced in Ginetta Juniors for a little bit before coming across to the Radical stable, and this is really what it's all about. In the space of a couple of years, he's been able to learn the mechanics of going sport prototype racing and is now up onto the European stage. But he has got a very, very significant exam question to answer in the next 27 minutes, because now Jaap Bartels bursts out of the pits and he is going to have a huge lead when this is shaken out.
Yeah, we look up the road and Paddy's not come into view yet, but yeah, he's done a fantastic job in the Radical Sprint Championship this year. Narrowly missed out on the championship title, but he's certainly been one of the fastest guys all season in the SR3, and son of another very experienced Radical racer in his father Paul, who again raced SR3s, from sort of the mid 2000s. So, he's really got to grips with the SR3. First time out here in the SR8, and it seems to be suiting him very well.
Here is Jeremy Ferguson, who exits the pits now. There is a question as we already into the second chicane on the lap for Jaap Bartels, and also waiting for Paddy Mcluhan to come past as well, which he does now. So Mcluhan is going to be somewhere adrift to Jeremy Ferguson. Yeah, there you see it, probably 5 seconds or so. But it's the deficit to Jaap Bartels and whether or not it's catchable, because the plus side here for Ferguson and Mcluhan is that they don't have to worry at all about fuel consumption. James Littlejohn, meanwhile, is really quite some way out of contention. He's currently 7th. He's flying, but is he's going to be doing very, very well. As he sets the fast lap of the race, 1 minute 51.5, Littlejohn's going to be doing very, very well to get himself into a podium finish.
As Riccardo Donor just comes into service pit stop, it looks like he might have just flat spotted a tyre there perhaps as well, so taking a look at that.
Here is our race leader, Jaap Bartels, and it's going to be at the end of this, the 17th lap, where we're going to start to find out what the situation is in terms of Bartels' lead and whether or not that is at all chaseable.
Meanwhile, further down the pack, Littlejohn just set the fastest lap of the race so far, a 1:51.9, so he's on a charge back up through the field. Obviously, Riccardo's in the pit stop, so that's a place gained immediately. It's only going to be a matter of time before he's onto the tail of Abbott.
So Jaap Bartels into the Rettifilio. Bartels and Mosley have had a couple of successes this year in the Spider, including actually at the first event of the year in Jerez, if memory serves correctly, and also in the non-championship event at Spa as well. Now, where is Jeremy Ferguson? We're sitting and waiting. The commentary box overlooks the start and finish line. Through Curva Grande for Jaap Bartels into the second chicane. We still await Jeremy Ferguson. Out of the second chicane as now Ferguson comes across the line. 40 seconds behind Jaap Bartels, but only 1.9 seconds up on Paddy Mcluhan. So Mcluhan doing what he can to chase down Jeremy Ferguson. But Jaap Bartels he can't quite afford to coast, but he certainly doesn't need to take any risks with this car, because there's time left in the race for about 12, 13 more laps. So unless Mcluhan is some 4 seconds lap quicker than Jaap Bartels.
Yeah, and I would think that Jaap would be fairly confident being able to match the pace of Jeremy Ferguson for sure, particularly if he's coming under pressure from Paddy. So this is looking really good for Jaap if he can just keep his head and keep on the track and on that drying line.
James Littlejohn, another fastest lap of the race, a 1 minute 51.0, and Littlejohn is 74 seconds back from Jaap Bartels, and that is the impact of the refuelling and the success seconds, and therefore it really is an advantage Spider for Jaap Bartels. Now, through the Parabolica, just snatching the brakes a little bit on the way into the Parabolica, finding the traction on the way out. Now, this is Bartels' first flying lap. This will give us an indication of the pace he's able to run at, and it's a 1 minute 55.2. That will do. Can keep running the 1 minute 55s until the flag, and won't be under any threat. The question on this lap is going to be, in fact, whether Paddy Mcluhan can find a way past Jeremy Ferguson. Because if Mcluhan can get past Ferguson, he might just be able to turn up the heat on Bartels. Here is a replay of Stuart Mosley before he handed over to Jaap Bartels. Again, total concentration from Mosley, but very, very relaxed stance in the cockpit. Yeah,
look at that. You can see him working the wheel there, but really very minimal steering inputs. You know, 2 turns, one to the right, one to the left, and very little overdriving. But now we can see this is Jeremy Ferguson coming under pressure from Paddy Mcluhan, and he's much closer this lap now, just 2 tenths away.
But Mcluhan can't force his way to the inside of Ferguson, and what that means is that whilst both of them have closed on Jaap Bartels, it's Mcluhan who's got the potential to be some 3 seconds lap quicker than Jaap Bartels. Jeremy Ferguson, exactly as you said, Will, is pretty much there or thereabouts on a par with the pace of Bartels. James Abbott has come through some 30 seconds later on a 1 minute 51, and he has got James Littlejohn just behind him. So the podium isn't altogether settled. I think there's certainly a case that James Abbott and James Littlejohn could chase down Jeremy Ferguson between now and the flag, particularly if Ferguson gets delayed with Mcluhan behind him. Here is a bit of a lock-up for Ferguson into the Parabolica. That would explain why Paddy Mcluhan was so close to his tail. And now this is where, however, experience in these SR8s comes to the fore, because Mcluhan won't be quite as confident in the braking distances of the SR8 compared to the more experienced Ferguson. This pair of them fling through Ascari. And then pick up the throttle.
Yeah, good exit of Ascari there by Mcluhan. The question is, you know, is he going to be able to challenge into the braking zone here? Doesn't look like he's quite close enough this lap.
He's just struggling to drive through the turbulent air, isn't he? Just that pocket of disturbed air immediately behind Jeremy Ferguson's car. And what that means is Mcluhan's not going to be able to take advantage of the slipstream on the way towards the Rettifilo this time, unless he does something very, very bold and late on the brakes. Both of them through in the 1 minute 52 second bracket. That plays a 1:54.8 from Jaap Bartels. So Bartels' lead eroded, but not by anything like enough to cause him concern. What Mcluhan will hope to do is maybe try and force the error from Jeremy Ferguson, but that is something that is seldom seen. But they have still got the luxury of 26 seconds over James Abbott. Abbott comes through and sets the fast lap of the race, so 1 minute 50.6 in fourth place. And this is also where championship points considerations have to come into play, because for Victor Correa, it doesn't really need Paddy Mcluhan unduly risking the car to try and overhaul Jeremy Ferguson. Pit window is closed, but everybody had made their pit stop well before its closure, so we've got just under 20 minutes remaining. Our race leader is Jaap Bartels, second Jeremy Ferguson, third Mcluhan, fourth James Abbott, fifth James Littlejohn, sixth is Alain Costa, in seventh place is Marco Cencetti. He leads the Supersport class from Ricardo Dona and Roger Bromley. Fourth in Supersport class is Bradley Ellis, and he stands every chance of overhauling both Dona and Bromley between now and the flag.
Yeah, currently lapping some 2 seconds a lap faster than Bromley, and Dona immediately ahead of him. So it's not going to take him too long with a 4.5 second disadvantage from those pair to reel that in.
Ooh, now that was a crane moving through camera. Waved yellow flags at the parabolic, and that's why it's Shaheen Nouri who has come to a halt right on the exit of the parabolica. And this is the reason why.
Looks like some front end damage there.
Yeah, and
just wondering if he maybe had contact with the barrier. Oh, and it looks like a suspension problem as well.
Yeah, the front left wheel seemed to have been knocked loose, but he's had a number of spins, Shaheen, in this race, but then probably one of the less experienced drivers in the field. This is all about the learning experience, and it's in the changeable conditions where several seasons of practice really starts to come to the fore.
Yeah, and it looks like I was going to say then for a second, it looks like Mcluhan had just closed up a few tenths to the back of Ferguson, but yeah, already he's back on his way, and that's extended. This is cat and mouse, and of course all the while
straight
Mcluhan
on,
just outbrakes himself slightly there, forced to run across the runoff and rejoin back in. But again, that will have cost him a few tenths. And this, all the while that this fight's going on, of course, this is manna from heaven for Jaap Bartels.
It really is, particularly as well. At the same time, Ferguson and Mcluhan are 4 seconds a lap quicker than Jaap Bartels at the moment. Bartels leads by 33 seconds, but at 4 seconds a lap, that could get eroded quite rapidly. It really depends if Jeremy Ferguson, without the pressure of Paddy Mcluhan, can sustain that pace in the low 1 minute 52s.
Yeah, or indeed if not having the pressure of having to defend will enable him to push even harder. But
so intriguing how this race is going to unfold. Here is Ricardo Dona, and that's not going to help his attempts to keep Bradley Ellis behind him too much. That would have felt very, very bumpy given the low ride height.
I'm sure he was wincing as he he felt the initial impact there and the front diffuser moved slightly, but yeah, back on his way.
This is going to be the 21st lap of the race, reeled off for our second place car, Jeremy Ferguson, and he does his personal best lap of the race, a 1 minute 52.0, and Jaap Bartels a 1 minute 54.2. It's another couple of seconds, 31.2 seconds. We've got a stop and go penalty to Roger Bromley for a pit lane infringement, and it's a 6 second stop and go, which suggests it was a 6 second short pit stop, and that is going to take Roger emphatically out of the podium chase in the Supersport class. Meanwhile, McLuhan and Ferguson, they're 24.8 seconds up on Abbott and Littlejohn.
Yeah, Littlejohn a little bit closer now, just 1.8 seconds behind Abbott. So that battle that could potentially turn into the final podium place is starting to hot up as well.
Although their rate of capture, I'm not convinced, is quite enough actually at the moment. That would require them possibly to just be close to 2.5 seconds rather than sort of 1.5 seconds lap. Here's the battle then between Littlejohn and Abbott. They've got Marco Cenchetti behind them on the road, but Cenchetti a lap down the Supersport leader. And I suspect for the moment Littlejohn might just be content to run with James Abbott, see if he closes up to him rapidly. They'll, I'm sure, be appraised via pitboard as to where Ferguson and McLuhan are up the road. And this is the beauty of these longer races in the Radical European Masters, is you get this strategic dimension into the second half of the race. This is where the gaps start to really be closed down.
Yeah, one of the big changes at the start of last season was that the need for the pros to start the second race and the sort of less experienced gentleman drivers to start the first race. So whereas in seasons gone by you'd find that all of the first stint drivers would have similar pace and likewise the second stint. Now of course you've got drivers out of position, you've got a real mix. It's part of the strategic mix. So, and that can lead to some really fascinating racing as we're seeing here.
Yeah, I think it's really boosted the entertainment factor, hasn't it, of these races, that you've got the different race plans being put into effect. We've still got a quarter of the race remaining. Jaap Bartels leads by 28.8 seconds over Jeremy Ferguson. Ferguson again 2.5 seconds quicker than Jaap Bartels. That's not going to be enough to unduly concern Jaap.
Meanwhile, that's Abbott just responding with a fastest lap there, just to try and eke out a little bit of fresh air from him and Littlejohn with a 50.257.
And Abbott, that last lap, 1.7 seconds quicker than Paddy Mcluhan. He's 23.1 seconds back from the fight for third place, and that isn't going to be enough for James Abbott or James Littlejohn to close up on to Ferguson and McLuhan. So we've got a situation here where we've got all of the top 5 cars are closing up on each other. Whether they're going to have quite enough time remaining and enough laps left in the race to make that meaningful, I think remains to be seen. At the end of this lap, we're probably going to have time for some 7 more laps, maybe squeeze an 8th out of it. It's going to be touch and go, as Jaap Bartels has just come past our commentary box and goes into his 24th lap with a 1:54.0 for Jaap. You can see that he's essentially half a lap ahead of this Abbott and Littlejohn fight.
Yeah, we just paused to see when Jeremy Ferguson will cross the line.
The answer is now. Ferguson sets his personal best lap of the race, 1:51.5, so 2.5 seconds quicker than Jaap Bartels. And of course, as Ferguson and McLuhan elevate their pace, and it really shows Jeremy Ferguson, I think, does go strongest when he's got McLuhan snapping in his heels, it means that Abbott and Littlejohn's opportunity to close in is reduced as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if he continues to lap some 3 seconds a lap faster than Bartels, then it's going to be very tight, but I can't see him being able to reel in that deficit to Bartels. I think there's still going to be 2 or 3 seconds in it at the checkered flag.
James Littlejohn now sets the fastest lap of the race, a 1:49.7, as you can see the race order bottom of your screen. Here is a replay of Jaap Bartels straight lining the first chicane. Cost him a couple of seconds, or at least it should. Abbott and Littlejohn running in tandem. James Littlejohn now just beginning to get into the stage where possibly he may feel that James Abbott is potentially going to thwart his progress. The race order then: Jaap Bartels leads from Jeremy Ferguson and Paddy Mcluhan. Then James Abbott, James Littlejohn, Alain Costa. Marco Cenchetti heads the Supersport class from Ricardo Dona and Bradley Ellis. But Ellis and Dona, I suspect, will swap places within the next lap or two. Into Ascari, headlights ablaze from James Abbott now, Paddy Mcluhan on that last lap, possibly through the lappery of Joseph Collar, would appear to have dropped some way back from Jeremy Ferguson. Here come the Jameses, Abbott and Littlejohn, respectively. Littlejohn in the blue and white machine. It's the black and gold car for James Abbott as they turn through the parabolica. That was a slower lap for Jeremy Ferguson, 52.7, but it was also, of course, that slower lap for Jaap Bartels. But the cross line for Abbott and Littlejohn, they elevate their pace to the low 1 minute 50-second bracket. They're now 18 seconds back from Ferguson and Mcluhan. And at 3 seconds a lap for James Abbott, it starts to become a little bit more meaningful. There's still 11 minutes remaining. He's got 18 seconds to haul in. So 3 seconds a lap, he needs 9 laps. That is unlikely.
I'm wondering if just as we saw in race 1, that perhaps Paddy's starting to find that the tyres on that car are a little bit past their best, and we certainly did see him on that last lap. It looked like the car was sliding a little bit more than he'd like. And this really is where the experience comes into it, because it's very easy to psychologically get to sort of tie yourself in knots. As you feel the car slide, you start to overdrive, and then that just wears the tyres even more. You generate more heat. You can really go round and round in circles, and the lap time drops off accordingly. So he just needs to keep calm, keep the car in a straight line, and ultimately the lap time will come back to him.
Exactly. The important thing to do is just remain relaxed. If you get frustrated with the car going away from you, which it will be doing at the end of a long race like this, then you've just got to make sure that you respond in a mature fashion. Jaap Bartels, off camera, has put in an excellent lap, a 1 minute 53.5 for Jaap, and as a result, that is going to just take away any jeopardy about his advantage. Now, Mcluhan was appreciably closer to James Abbott that time round along the back straight. Abbott has got Joseph Collar ahead of him in the fan favourite 1970s Ferrari liveried SR3. And Collar causes no problems. And yes, Mcluhan has had a much slower lap, a 2 minutes 2.2, and that suggests a spin for Paddy Mcluhan somewhere out on track in the middle sector, because he gave away an awful lot of time, and suddenly Victor Craig and Paddy Mcluhan's third place is...
now just a 6-second difference between Abbott and Mcluhan, so huge chunk of time taken out of him on that last lap.
Now, the real concern here for Mcluhan is not necessarily James Abbott, but it is James Littlejohn in terms of championship points, because Abbott, don't forget, is in the invitation class, so he's not scoring points today, but James Littlejohn could well go about taking points off Paddy Mcluhan. Meanwhile,
see Roger Bromley there, having served his pit stop infringement, just being in for the lap flag, and that's, we see somebody just there off the track briefly, I think.
And what happened there with James Abbott? He suddenly slowed, moved across the inside of the track, and allowed James Littlejohn through. Now, was that Abbott being caught out by something on the car? Let's have another look at it. Mcluhan running wide, so that's what cost him all that time a lap ago.
We just look to the background of the shot.
And so there is Paddy Mcluhan. Here comes James Littlejohn. Whatever the problem was for James Abbott, it seems to have rectified itself. I just wonder whether Abbott decided enough was enough, and in fact he's got a little bit of loose rear bodywork. A little bit of,
as you say, just a little bit of bodywork damage there. Perhaps that's he's caught that in his mirror and seen that, and he's put him off briefly.
Yeah, and he may also have just decided that...
Now, Paddy's got to be really careful as well here. He's been given a warning flag for track limits, so yeah, I'm sure that's going to be playing on his mind as Littlejohn looms ever larger in his mirrors. And in fact, it looks like he's got a really good toe this lap.
Yeah, James Littlejohn isn't going to waste any time, I'm sure, in trying to find a way past Paddy Mcluhan if he can do so. And with 7.5 minutes remaining, the Mcluhan's car has just gone away from him, a 1 minute 57 on that last lap, and Littlejohn eases past on the way into the Rettifilio. And I think Paddy Mcluhan is discovering just what it feels like to run on very worn tyres. And in fact, is it a more significant issue, because Mcluhan slows right down coming out of the Rettifilio. Mark Crader repasses him, so does James Abbott. And that's such a shame for Mcluhan and Victor Craig. Twice in 2 races, they've been right up there in the podium area and have encountered issues. 6 minutes and 40 seconds remaining. I struggle to see that that's Mcluhan running out of fuel. It's a bit of a mystery as to why he slowed so suddenly, possibly ingesting a stone when he went through the gravel a lap or so ago. Promotes Little John up to third as a result. It promotes James Abbott to fourth. Now, if Mcluhan can keep running, then fifth place is very much on the cards, because Alain Costa is a long, long way back in sixth. Here is Jaap Bartels across the line. And Jaap Bartels and Stuart Mosley have managed this race absolutely to perfection. Jaap Bartels sets the car's best lap of the race, a 1 minute 53.1, which shows that the track is now well and truly dried out.
Yeah, 16-second advantage over Ferguson with just over 5.5 minutes left to run. So this is looking really, really good for the Nielsen Racing Spider, and it'll help their championship efforts no end. You know, particularly with that DNF yesterday.
And Jeremy Ferguson has also done enough in his stint not to have any concerns about the progress of James Littlejohn. Here is Littlejohn, but he's 19 seconds back from Jeremy Ferguson. James Abbott has had an elevation of pace once more. He rides shotgun to Abbott in fourth place. Now, what about Paddy Mcluhan? Is he going to complete the lap? Yes, he does. So Mcluhan continues on his way. He's just done 2 minutes 8.4. Gave away 15 seconds, 18 seconds on that last lap to the true pace of the track at the moment. Just wonder possibly whether Carrera and Mcluhan risked wet tyres, and whether or not they've completely gone away from them, which would possibly explain why the pace has suddenly dropped.
Just see another replay. Oh, another big slide. Yes, yeah, I see what you mean.
And Mcluhan did very, very well to avoid that being quite a substantial hit with the tyre barrier.
Yeah, that's right. You saw the big black lines he was leaving there as he really had to get the power on to get the car turned in. But yeah, it's a real shame, as you say, a very similar scenario to yesterday when he struggled in the latter stages of the race with a car that clearly wasn't to his liking.
It'll be interesting actually in the third race whether or not Paddy Mcluhan starts it, and just to see what he can do with the car box fresh, as you were saying, because both occasions he's picked up the car mid-race and has had to manage the fuel, had to manage the tyres. Well, Littlejohn and Abbott, that battle has more or less steadied itself out. Jeremy Ferguson continues to close on to Jaap Bartels. Bartels into his antepenultimate lap of the race. Don't think it's going to quite be the last lap of the race when he comes through on the next occasion, but we will see. And a race that had so much drama before we even got underway, with the instance on the installation lap for Terrence Woodward and John Corbett, the spin on the formation lap for Alex Capadia. But that's a little bit of a case of all's well that ends well, because Ferguson and Capadia would appear to be on course to get second place through Curva Grande for Littlejohn and Abbott. And what we can hope is that the weather remains as it is, and that the rain holds off until the end of the day, because that will give us a pure dry race when we return later on this afternoon for the concluding race of our Radical European Masters triple header. The coverage starting at 15:20 local time, and do make sure you join us as James Littlejohn setting another fastest lap as the track comes to him, 1 minute 49.2. And
again, you can really see, just as we saw in race one, that car looks so stable. You know, look at that. You know, no oversteer at all or correction there. Really looks well set up, doesn't it?
I think they will be, he and Tony Wells will be very, very happy with their return to the Radical European Masters. Jaap Bartels into the Rettifilio for the penultimate time, and Jaap, completely understandably, not feeling the need to elevate his pace unnecessarily. He's got a 12.5 second lead over Jeremy Ferguson. Unless Ferguson pulls out some lap record pace from the bag, then that is not going to be caught. Well, Jaap Bartels and Stuart Mosley have had a fair degree of bad luck this season, but they have also had a few days where it has gone absolutely perfectly. Really smart race strategy from the Nielsen Racing team this morning, and it is looking as if it's going to result in a victory for Bartels and Mosley. But this is now the stage of the race where every beat of the engine will be examined in the cockpit by Jaap Bartels. He'll be listening.
Undoubtedly, it's far from over, and just as we saw on the final lap of the race yesterday, you know, with those two retirements in the shape of Mcluhan and Capadia, just stuttering, did a really, you know, was very lucky to make it over the line.
It's very unusual to have any sort of mechanical failure with these radicals, but when you're out front and you want the win, you'll just be listening for every single note of the engine, every single gear shift, and making sure that you drive within yourself, but that you don't relax altogether. You don't do a Nigel Mansell, allegedly, at Canada in 1991, and wave to the crowd and hit the off switch on the car. You just want to keep doing what you were doing, and that is, so far, working very effectively for Jaap Bartels. He comes across the line now and embarks on his final lap of the race, another lap in the mid 1 minute 53 second bracket. So Ferguson does have an elevation of pace, actually. Ferguson brings Bartels' advantage down to about 8.8 seconds. But for another couple of laps, that could have got very interesting.
Yeah, you just see him jinking through the chicane at the top of the picture there, but no, barring any mistakes here by Bartels, this is a fantastic result for him. They've had a difficult weekend, a spin and bodywork damage in testing earlier in the week, and then obviously that DNF yesterday as well. But this is a fine return to form for the Nielsen Racing squad, and just desserts for Bartels and Mosley, and this will really help their championship campaign, and particularly with Woodward Kaiser, you know, retiring on the opening lap. Alos isn't here. He's currently in third position in the championship.
And an ailing Paddy Mcluhan as well.
And an ailing Paddy Mcluhan. This is just what they needed to get their championship back on track.
So if this result can be played into another decent result in the final race of the afternoon, then we could really have a fantastic championship fight going into the Circuit de Catalunya. For now, though, for Jaap Bartels and Stuart Mosley, it is about to be celebration time as through Ascari for the final time and on towards the Parabolica. This is the sole remaining challenge for Jaap Bartels and Stuart Mosley. They have had really the perfect race, and there is Jeremy Ferguson in the background looming large, but he's not going to be close enough to cause any concern to Jaap Bartels, who turns into the Parabolica now. As the clock has run to zero, the checkered flag is ready and waiting, and it's going to be victory in the second race in Monza this weekend in the Radical European Masters for Jaap Bartels and Stuart Mosley. They take the win. Second place goes to Jeremy Ferguson and Alex Capadia, and then in third, through the Parabolica, James Littlejohn and Tony Wells will be completing the podium. Littlejohn hurtles through to take the flag and eventually getting to within 14 seconds of Ferguson at the line. Fine fourth from the pit lane for James Abbott. And then in terms of the Supersport class, Bradley Ellis and Andy Cummins already across the line to take second in class. Our expectation is that Marco Cincetti and Marcello Maritiotto will be taking the win. So great stuff from Bartels and Mosley. Really well managed race. You can see Jaap Bartels absolutely delighted with that.
Yeah, and as well as mine, as you said, he did a great job to keep his head and maintain a good pace all the way to the end. You know, those last couple of laps still consistently in the mid 53s. So he did just what he needed to and kept a good advantage, despite that late increase in pace by Ferguson.
Well, here is Paddy Mcluhan, who is still running, and be worth exploring what went wrong, because suddenly that car dropped to being about 15 seconds off the pace. But Mcluhan is going to bring the car home in 5th place. That's going to be very handy championship points, particularly in a race which Terrence Woodward and Ross Kaiser weren't even able to start. So through the Parabolica for the final time, I think Paddy Mcluhan will be mightily relieved to see the checkered flag being draped from the gantry as he accelerates through and takes 5th place. So the Supersport class claimed by Marcello Maritotto and Marco Cenchetti, as we'll have a look at the final results. So the win for Jack Bartels and Stuart Mosley, second place Alex Capadia and Jeremy Ferguson, third Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, fourth was James Abbott, fifth Victor Carrera and Paddy Mcluhan, sixth was Alan Costa, seventh in the top Supersport car Marcello Maritotto and Marco Cenchetti, from Andy Cummings and Bradley Ellis, second in the Supersport class, and then Ricardo Dona completing that podium, clear of Roger Bromley, Mark Crader, and then Vrat Till and Collar. Shaheen Nouri, unfortunately a retiree, as was Jean Gandar. John Corbett and Terrence Woodward not even able to take to the start after their installation lap problems. So into Parc Ferme for our winners, Jack Bartels and Stuart Mosley. Bartels unclips his belts and jumps out. Now this is also potentially good news for Jack Bartels in the Fangio Trophy as well.
Yeah, that's right. They're currently some 126 points adrift of Alos again, who's leading it. But of course, with him not hitting as a non-show here, it's going to close up the gap to Alan Costa, who I think will now be the champion-elect.
Jeremy Ferguson also out of his car in Parc Ferme, as rolling to a halt is James Littlejohn. So don't forget, our second race from today will be at 3:20 this afternoon. We will take a look in a moment's time at the highlights of an excellent race, as from the start it was Victor Crair who looked to take the early advantage, as Alex Capadia, having spun on the formation lap, starting from the back of the field. The early stages were somewhat treacherous, a very slippery circuit, particularly offline. Shaheen Nouri was caught out early on whilst doing battle with Roger Bromley. That was the first of a couple of spins for the Swiss driver. Meanwhile, at the front of the field, it's Crair who was making the running from Stuart Mosley, and then Alex Capadia, who was scything through the pack. Okay, no problem. Another spin for Shaheen Nouri mid-race, as Capadia pulled off the perfect Monza slingshot past Stuart Mosley, and then a couple of laps later doing exactly the same to Victor Crair. But the talking point at this point of the race is, would the SR8s need to refuel, and therefore did that mean the advantage for Capadia and Crair appeared to be a little bit false? The answer was yes, it was. It meant that Jack Bartels emerged from the pits with a very healthy lead over Jeremy Ferguson and Paddy Mcluhan. Problems for Mcluhan promoted Littlejohn up into third place, but it was Jack Bartels and Stuart Mosley who came through to score the victory. Fine drive for the Spider drivers. Second place, Jeremy Ferguson and Alex Capadia. James Littlejohn and Tony Wells completing the podium, with Marco Cenchetti and Marcello Maritotto taking Super Sport honours. So we will be back at 3:20 this afternoon for the concluding race of the weekend for the Radical European Masters. Until then, from Will Brown and myself, Ben Evans, here in Monza, it's goodbye.